it going, Connor?
It's going good.
Welcome to Boots and Brews, everyone. My semi-regular channel, first episode, where we sit down and we answer questions and just generally chat about all things hiker trash related. Basically, it's where Connor and I awkwardly sit next to each other on a couch and stare into the camera, because we can't do this live yet. But in true hiker trash form, Pabst Blue Ribbon.
Mm-hmm.
Just a quick disclaimer, although I don't cuss a lot on my videos, I did work as a firefighter for 10 years, and I do sometimes curse, and that may come out because this is unscripted. Fair enough?
Fair to me, yeah.
Right. How's it going?
It's going great. Yeah, I'm happy to be here and love talking about this kind of stuff. So, I know you had just recently been on a trip up to Lake Mary, that area. How'd that go?
It did not go well. No, we got rained on, which is good for the mountains because we were about 20 miles away from one of the 5 wildfires in the state of Montana right now. But yeah, on our way up, it just rained constantly, and it stopped just in time for us to get to camp, so we thought we'd still give a go of it. We camped that night, and the next day, it just continued to downpour. So we decided that beer and pizza sounded like a better option, and we headed back down into Red Lodge, and yeah, we just went bar hopping after that.
Right
After
on.
having some pizza. And
We,
beer.
you being a couple.
Yeah, there's 3 other guys I went with.
Okay, sweet.
So, and then, and then of course in similar fashion to that kind of a bad overall weekend, I couldn't have scripted it better, and of course I didn't catch it on video, but I sat down on a log to have a break, and the log split, and I fell on my ass, and I stabbed myself in the hand with the branch. So, yeah, that's kind of how that trip went.
Classic, yeah.
They can't all be winners, and any trip you come away with good stories and maybe a little lesson learned is not a bad thing.
Yeah, I mean, just getting out there is half the fun for me.
It's true. So anyways, yeah, so this, I call this thing Boots and Brews because that is what I always envisioned I would name a podcast where we would talk about hiker trash lifestyle. But I figure this is the next best thing because I really don't think I have the voice for a podcast. I don't know. But anyways, this is just an opportunity to sit down and talk all things hiker trash. So some of you may or may not be familiar with that term. It's a term of endearment for those of us who choose the lifestyle of the backpacker. I think it's more aptly created for the thru hiking community, but I think it's something that we can adopt for all hikers. I certainly enjoy the hiker trash lifestyle. Connor, I think you're kind of newer you've been backpacking for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
I think you're new to the community surrounding backpacking.
Oh, definitely.
What is your take on hiker trashness?
Well, you explained it best by using the Pabst Blue Ribbon to kind of, it's affordable, it's fun, and anyone can get into it. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
Like, it doesn't have to be this crazy thing, and that's what I would say this beer represents it perfectly. There's something special about everything to do with the outdoors, and I see hiker trash being a very inviting thing, even though I could see some people being scared away from it.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I think that's the main reason why the trash part of it is used, because people who don't understand it are oftentimes freaked out by it. I think for me, it's just life in the simplest form.
Mm-hmm.
It's about living simply, not being afraid to be dirty, smelly, and sustain off of ramen noodles and beef jerky for a couple weekends.
Heck yeah.
So anyways, the main reason why I did this was when I hit 250 subscribers, I said I wanted to do a question and answer, and I requested some questions, and you guys responded back. I would have loved to have done this live, but I only have the ability to do it through a mobile device, and I have to have 1,000 subscribers for that. So if you want to see me live, hit that subscribe button. Shameless plug. Probably already subscribed if they're watching though.
Oh yeah.
The cool news is that since I came up with this idea, I actually hit 282 subscribers. So, cheers. All right, let's get down to it. So, my trusty iPad here, we have a bunch of different questions lined up. So, first and foremost, love to wander, sorry. That's LOVE, the number 2, and Wander. He also has a channel. Check him out. Really great channel. He's been a supporter for I think, pretty close to the beginning of this for a while. So he asks, what got you into the outdoors? And every single answer I have for this is completely 100% cliche. First and foremost, it was my dad. My dad had a love for the outdoors, especially Yosemite and Ansel Adams pictures and things like that. And of course, I saw those growing up and became interested, and he took me to a lot of different places, including Yosemite. And that definitely started my love for the outdoors, and that was further built by being a scout. And having my first real backpacking experiences through that, and also some really awesome mentors there that kind of helped me out through. So, yeah, dad and scouts. Doesn't get much more cliche than that, at least for a guy. That was kind of sexist. Might have to edit that out. How about you?
Honestly, I've thought about this quite a bit before, and I can never pin down exactly what it was. I don't remember. My dad never disliked the outdoors, but he never loved it. We did stuff together when I was younger, but he never really got me into it. It was just an interest, and I had friends who were interested. And there's something about, I know, right? I've always been, ever since I was a kid, we've had a place up at Flathead Lake, and I love doing everything out on the water, getting out, the smell of fresh air, and I just wanted to do that as much as possible. And that's kind of what led me to get really into backpacking, hiking. I hunt, I fish. I love doing literally everything to do with the outdoors. Snowboarding, that sort of stuff. Cross-country skiing, I tried for the first time this last year and loved it. And just, if it's outdoors, I want to do it.
I also enjoy long walks on the beach, conversations over wine, crackling fires. Oh, wait, sorry. Wrong video. All right, on to the next one. Adam B., who's a friend of mine from college, who we've had some fun times together. Hey, Adam. What got you interested in backpacking? It's a natural next progression.
Sure.
And frankly, the two things that got me involved in backpacking were absolute nightmares. Everything that could go wrong could. My dad loves reminding me of this story. It was the first time that we went backpacking, my dad and I, and neither of us had any clue what to do. I think I was like 16 or 17 at the time. We were grossly overloaded. We at one point managed to walk through a stinging nettle patch in shorts and set our legs on fire. And his absolute favorite part to remind me was the point where we were going up a hill, and as he puts it, I faked an asthma attack. Which honestly is probably not too far from the truth, because it was pretty god awful. And then a few years later, it was a couple years later, I think, when I was 18, I had an opportunity to go with my scout troop to Philmont Scout Ranch in New Mexico. That was a 10-day long, I think we did like a 110-mile hiking trip in New Mexico in the Cimarron-Cito area, the Sande de Crista mountain range, which is a pretty cool name for a mountain range. And the very first day that we were on there, my boots, which I didn't properly break in, just tore my heels right off. And before hiking in sneakers was cool, I did the entire thing in a pair of terrible, cheap tennis shoes, and my feet were so rubbed raw that my white liner socks were literally red at the end of it. And it just was absolutely miserable experience for me. At least halfway through, until one of the leaders of the group, Paul, who I'm still friends with to this day, kind of pulled me aside, and he and I had a little bit of a tiff earlier in that day, and he basically told me, he's like, you can't let the suck parts of the trip outweigh the good times, the good views, and the great people you're with. And I guess I took that to heart and decided I wasn't going to let that, my only big backpacking trip, be a bad memory. And so I continued on, and next thing I know, it's become such a hobby that I literally went to school for it, and I work in the industry now, and I make YouTube videos because why not? This is my life now. So. How about you?
For me, it was the challenge of it. I started, like, we'd go out on a day hike, and that was the end of it. Then I started doing some car camping and enjoying that, and then it was like, well, what's the next progression as far as difficulty? Not necessarily difficulty, but challenge. and for me it was backpacking, and I remember doing it, and I was very ill-equipped. I had the bare minimum for gear. I didn't have a sleeping pad. The sleeping bag was the cheapest one I could find at Cabela's. I had an external frame backpack, and I was just like, this is enough to get me to do what I want to do. And I went with a buddy and had a horrible night's sleep and just hated the next day. But it's one of those types of fun where in the moment I hated it, but now looking back, I love it. Like, it's one of those memories that gets me excited to go out and do it again. Now, not in that same scenario where I have that external frame or without a sleeping pad. I'll never do that again. But just get out there no matter what. And
yeah, I think the worst trips I've been on have had the best stories.
Oh yeah, that's how it is. Yeah,
I mean, even on this last backpacking trip, we sat around while making food, told stories about times we had various poop memories. If you spend any kind of time in backpacking, you know poop seems to be a regularly recurring story topic. All right, this next one comes from one of my Instagram followers, and I am gonna butcher this Instagram handle. It's Ingila Bear. I'm so sorry if that's not the way it's supposed to be pronounced. They asked, what do you enjoy most? Solo, hiking with one person, or a group? Yes. I like all three of them. They all have their own benefits and interests for me. You know, solo hiking. For me, solo hiking, I love getting out and just getting away from everything. And I always go into it thinking I'm going to have this great existential, like, realizing moment. And I spend most of the time just with trying to get stupid song lyrics out of my head. And rarely ever actually have that that moment. But for times, it's really a good opportunity to get out and just kind of enjoy it outside by myself. I do a lot of one-person trips with just one person, like my friend Jay or you. It's just a great opportunity to really have a great bonding experience with another person, especially if that person likes the things that you do, and you know, just an opportunity. And it's also nice because you don't spend the entire time stuck in your own head and actually have good conversations and stuff. And then hiking with a group can be also a lot of fun because there's a lot of group dynamics and stuff. Of course, you have to make sure that the group gets along, you know, well enough. But there's nothing more fun than sitting around and just telling silly stories with a group. Oh, yeah. So yeah, I think they're all great. I couldn't really honestly pick one. It's kind of a cop-out, but
I'm honestly in the same boat. For me, solo hiking is, again, like that first backpacking experience I had where at the time I have to force myself to get up and do it. And while I'm doing it, I start to enjoy it more and more. And by the time I'm done with it, I'm like, wow, I'm ready to go again. Like, I wish I was still back up there. And that, for me, that's solo hiking. And I somehow love it, but it might not be my favorite. I'd have to pick either with a group or with someone else. But I still do and will solo hike. Always. There's just something about it that keeps me coming back.
When in doubt, just walk away.
Yep.
Right. Windy S asked, do you know of a weather app that shows radar without cell service? And understandable because, well, as we found out this weekend, weather in the mountain is greatly unpredictable. Unfortunately, no, I do not. In order to get that information, there has to be some sort of a back and forth. The closest that I've seen and what I actually use is I use my Garmin InReach device. And you can do weather updates. Now, they're just standard form, you know, 20% chance of showers, blah, 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 forecasts, you know, partly sunny, temperatures and whatnot. Nothing with an actual radar. I think it's mainly just because that would take a ton of data to transfer. And most of the data that goes back and forth in the satellite communicators is pretty rudimentary. Otherwise, it would become incredibly expensive. I do know there's a premium weather app. I've not used it before. I don't know what all else it does. It may give radar. I'd be really surprised, though, if it did.
Well, and it might be worth talking the plans on the Garmin InReach. There's different levels of those plans. I don't think it changes does it change based off of what level you have on the detail or anything?
No, it just basically, so anytime that you do a weather request or weather update, it costs a message.
Oh, sure.
So if you have the lowest level, it would eat up. It could eat up your messages to the point where you're spending, I think, 10 cents a message. If you have the unlimited messages, you can do weather all day long and nobody's going to care. So yeah, it's a really good point. It's definitely dependent on what your service are. I use messages so often. I think the thing that I've used messaging the most for has been weather updates.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
I use the weather app, and I've never had to use it, but I have it for the SOS, and that's really it. Once or twice, I've coordinated rides picking me up.
Oh, sure.
Because I'm a ride mooch. But other than that, yeah, I think that's the only thing I know of. If anybody out there knows of anything else, please leave a comment below, and let's see if we can find Wendy a solution to her perplexing situation. Alex L. wants to know if there's any more information on the Western Mountaineering Astrolite top quilt that I have. I've gotten this request from a few people. I guess there's really not a lot of info out there on it, mainly because it did go through kind of a change, and there's even less information out on its current form, which uses a 12 denier count instead of a 9 denier, and it is generally more breathable. I've only used it on 2 occasions, including this weekend, and both occasions it really worked, in my opinion, pretty flawlessly. Now, I have to say that having only ever slept in a regular sleeping bag, it does take a little getting used to using a top quilt versus a sleeping bag. If you toss and turn a lot, you are going to break the seal every once in a while, so to speak, and there are going to be drafts and stuff, so you just have to kind of get used to how you're going to move around a little bit to kind of minimize that, or just understand that you may get a cold blast every once in a while on your backside, and just kind of live with that. Of course, the other thing too is it doesn't have a hood, so on some of those colder nights it's really nice to make sure you have at least a beanie cap or one of the hoods like the one I have from Enlightened Equipment, which is awesome, by the way. And kind of deal with that. It did get really cold and rainy this weekend, and it was really high humidity, and I did not have any issues with dampness in the bag, so they have definitely fixed the breathability issue, which is awesome. So overall, I'm still really, really happy with it. If you don't want to deal with the possibility of having drafts and everything once in a while, I don't recommend a top quilt. There are ways to work around it, but you do have to get used to how it sits. And then there's some other interesting aspects. For instance, last night I had the snap around the collar done to keep warm because it was a lot colder. And when I went up to go use the bathroom, I sat up and forgot that it was snapped, and it unsnapped. And I thought for sure I had just snapped one of the cords. And so after a few moments of panic and trying to find my headlamp and making sure I didn't just totally break my $400 top quilt, turned out it was just a snap and everything was fine. That was a moment of a little bit of panic. But right now, other than that, I really can't think of anything negative to say about it. I can say I don't think it's for everyone. But if you're willing to and wanting to make that choice, I say go for it.
Can I ask, what compared to, because you have the Alpenlight as well?
I do.
Is there ever a scenario you could see where you might use that instead of the Astrolite, the quilt?
So Astrolight's rated down to about 29 degrees. So I think if there was a possibility, because the Alpenlight, God, that is such a confusing.
Oh, yeah,
I got the 2 most similar named ones. It does go down to 20 degrees, and actually for me, I've had it down to 10 degrees comfortably. I would say if it was going to be a colder temperature, I would definitely use this full sleeping bag. As a matter of fact, I had some cold this trip, because it did get down into, I would say, well into the lower 30s.
Oh, wow.
But I actually think that was more to do with my pad. I have the AXL Air by Big Agnes, and it's a great pad. It's it's really comfortable, but it does struggle in colder temperatures. It only has an R value of 3. We didn't think it was going to get that cold this weekend, so I didn't bring the second pad.
Sure.
And it just took a while for it. Now, once the pad warmed up and it started to reflect, because it uses a Mylar reflector, it was fine. I was very comfortable. It was just that first 40 minutes or so. So, yeah, I was wondering if that coldness was because of the bag. It was not, or the top coat. It was not. It was definitely the pad.
Sure.
So, Just like any other thing, you just have to make sure you have your whole system dialed in as best you can. But I would say, yeah, if I was going to be going into something colder, I would probably use the whole bag. So great question, Alex. I hope that helped you out. I'm going to use it a few more times and then do a follow-up video to my first video on it. But yeah, I've only done 2 trips so far. So 2 weeks from now, you, me, and Jay are going to be, that's grammarly incorrect, but you and I are, all 3 of us are going to go out for a week-long trip in the Bighorns. So that'll be the big test, I think. So should be fun. I'm looking forward to that trip.
Oh, so am I. Big time.
All right. The next one, again, I'm going to butcher this name. Micah Katz, Micakacz, asks, what trail would you recommend for a 4 to 5 night trip in Montana? That's a pretty good question. I think it really depends on what your ability levels are, because there are some trails here that some people can do in 1 day. Some people do it in 2 or 3. Others can do it in 4 or 5. I would say the biggest one that I would recommend, the 2 biggest one personally, and now most of these are going to be around the Beartooth, Absaroka region, because that's where I've done most of my hiking. This is a huge state, and I've only lived here since 2014. But there is a trail here. It's commonly referred to the Beaten Path or the Over the Top Path or the Cook City to East Rosebud. Generally speaking, you can do that in 2 nights, but if you wanted to take your time, or do some side trips up to some of the side drainages and stuff off trail, you could very easily turn that into a 4 to 5 night trip. And then my other favorite is going to probably be Sundance Pass. Again, not very high in mileage, but there are a lot of different things you can do while you're up there. And again, just depends on what pace you're going for. As far as like a true like longer distance one, it would be tough, I think, to find a really good stretch there. But there are a lot of trails, and you can definitely piece together your own trip. And I really haven't come across anything in those mountain ranges that I would say wouldn't be worth hiking, because it's all really gorgeous. So again, it really just depends on what your comfort level is, what mileage you usually put down, those kind of things. The biggest thing I would say around here is if you do want a true 4 to 5 day trip, don't get hung up on the mileage. Like, you're not going to be finding that length while putting down 20-mile days. So slow down, enjoy the trip, and see the sights. But yeah, a lot of these trails you could easily turn into really strong week-long trip.
In that same area, it's still the Absaroka Beartooth area. I've talked to you about wanting to do this trail, and I've done it both sides part way through, but the West Fork Stillwater to Sioux Charlie, and that's a whole loop. You can go up to the Lake Fork or to the Lake Plateau, and there's a bunch of side trips you can do up there. I think that would be an awesome. Most people do that in 4 days or so.
Yeah, I think our coworker Alex did that. He said
sure.
Definitely. And we nicknamed this guy the Human Mountain Goat. So if he's saying it's definitely a 4-day trip, it's definitely a 4-day trip. So yeah, it's definitely one I've wanted to do as well.
Oh yeah, no, I plan to do that. Probably not this year, but next year for sure.
Another thing that you can do, we did, Jay and I did a trip, and it's actually one of my first video series if you look back on it. But we actually took 2 trails and kind of stitched them together with a stop in a mountain town, kind of like a through hike, a little mini through hike. And we did from the Woodbine Trailhead all the way down the Stillwater, up the Stillwater drainage, over Daisy Pass, stayed at night in Cook City, and then we took that over the top, or that Beaten Path trip back out. And we ended up doing that over 7 days, and that was a really great trip. So if you do that, I recommend booking. There's a hotel there. I think it's called the Alpine Hotel. They're really accommodating. We sent a package ahead of time with a resupply, and they were really helpful. So yeah, it was great. We did 4 days on the Stillwater, and then we stopped in Cook City and got a shower and a nice bed and a hot meal, and then we headed on out the Beaten Path. So it just kind of depends on how creative you want to make it. So thanks for the question. Ingila Bear has another question. What editing app / software do you use? I am super sophisticated in how I do everything. Not really. I use iMovie on my iPad. it's kind of a cop-out, but for me, I'm not really into real fancy editing, so I just kind of like to do it really basic and not sophisticated. That may change as I get better and better. I think hopefully I've gotten better in making videos over the last 2 years. But for me, it's a simple software that I've been able to utilize very well. The only other things I use Canva to make my thumbnails, and all of my music comes from Epidemic Sounds. So, yeah, just super basic stuff. It's just very easy because I can use the GoPro app to download all the stuff right into my iPad and just edit from there. So, yeah, it's been super helpful. Just what happens to be what works for me. And then she also asked, how did you decide to move to Montana, and was Billings your first choice? So I moved to Montana in 2014, and I moved to Montana. Basically, I decided I was going to move here and moved here about a month after that. I was working for Ohio State Parks as a seasonal naturalist, environmental educator, and I needed a job for my off season. And without going into all of the pathetic, sad, sappy details, because of a girl, I felt the strong desire to get out of Ohio for a while. And so a friend of mine who was working out here at an environmental education site asked me if I wanted to come out here for a winter. So the goal was only be out here for a few months. But of course, if you lived in Ohio your entire life, which I did up until that point, and you moved out west and you see how awesome it is out here, it's really hard to go back. And so I didn't. I stayed. That job I got didn't work out, but I found the job with the outdoor store that we both work at, and it's been great ever since. As far as whether Billings was my first choice, Billings was my only choice because it was a job and it was here in Billings, and so here I am. So, yeah. And I think you grew up here, didn't you?
I did. Born and raised in Billings, went to school in Bozeman. So, yeah, I've been Montana bound my whole life, but I kind of don't want to go anywhere else. So
I don't blame you.
yeah,
Definitely don't go to Ohio.
no, yeah, I'd visit. I've visited before.
All my friends that are subscribers now are like, "Excuse me." All right. Second to last question, because I got one right before we started filming, but this one came in while. This is from YouTube or Instagram handle San Juan Gypsy, which is
Quite
pretty
name.
badass
Yeah.
name for Instagram. She's also a really badass person, so shout out to her. What is your favorite backpacking trail and your most challenging? My favorite backpacking trail was pretty much any trail that I can backpack on. But if I had to really narrow it down, I am really partial to the Sundance Pass. It's a really awesome experience, and I've hiked it several times, and it's always been great, and I've had some really great memories on it. I also really enjoyed the Beaten Path. It's just also a beautiful spot, so it's just so hard to narrow it down.
Mm-hmm.
And been able to hike in some really awesome places. How about, what's your favorite?
Favorite? That's tough. I would say my favorite would probably be when I just went down the West Fork Stillwater to Breakneck Meadows. It is gorgeous. It's a fun hike. It's not super long. But that was the same trail that I was very underprepared for. So that would also be the worst, but not because the trail was difficult, but because I was unprepared. So
yeah, my most challenging is going to be similar to that, and that would be the Stillwater portion of that trail I talked about just earlier with that segment. And that is because that trail on the map looks like it's very nice and open, and then when you get back in there, we didn't see another human being for 3 days. We saw some grizzlies, but it's not a widely used trail. It's very overgrown. It's the most vegetation I've ever seen in any of the Beartooth areas. And so those areas that look like they're big and flat and open for camping aren't. And also you don't have as easy access to water as it looks like you do, because it's like trying to get through a jungle. So there are a few areas that we almost ran out of water. We had to camp in a meadow. All of our stuff got completely soaked. I was wearing waterproof boots, and just mentally I wasn't in a good spot for it. Also, I had just started to try to get in shape, and so I was still really out of shape. There's a really major climb, so I would say it was challenging because of the mental game of it. I would actually love to do that trail again now that I'm in better shape and I'm better prepared and I know what I'm getting into. But I think that's kind of the fun of it too, because you get into these trails and you don't really know what you're getting into when you go into a new trail. So sometimes you get surprised, and that can create a little bit of a challenge. And at one point in that video, I was really discouraged mentally until we got up to this beautiful vista, and it was just like everything was okay.
Oh yeah. It's funny how fast things can change.
Oh yeah.
Back there like that.
Yeah, one good view and all that suck goes away. So, but yeah, thanks for that question. And then I'm going to find the question. Last question comes from my buddy Ryan, who was in the last trip that we were on. That was a little bit of a nightmare, and I'm pretty certain is why he asked this question. He asked, "What's the best and worst backpacking trips you've been on, and why?" Well, I think we know the worst one already, which was the trip with my dad. I love my dad to death, but my God, that was a nightmare. As far as the best backpacking trip I've been on, oh man, I've been on so many good ones. I always tend to go back to the first trip that I did with my buddy Alex, who hasn't really ever been in any of the videos I've done, but he's a really great friend of mine. And it was over Sundance Pass. It was before I got healthy, and I still managed to make it up there. And it was just a really fun and rewarding trip, and it wasn't even one of the better physically ones, but it was just really a lot of fun. But the other answer that I have at is that my best trip is the next one I have planned. So.
It's fair, yeah. Yeah, best and worst. Honestly, the recent one we did, I had a blast. That was a very fun trip. Yeah. I mean, it was only one night, but there's nothing wrong with having one night. Yeah, you're out there. That's what matters.
The weather was great. Nobody else was out there. We got to see that moose.
Yeah, that was cool. Nowhere. Yeah. And then it was wild how we woke up that morning and it was like fog, like thick fog. Not 30 minutes later after we packed up, it was the clearest I'd ever seen it and the calmest I'd ever seen it up there.
Yeah.
And that was very, very cool. That was definitely up there in my best trips.
Classic moment of packing up to keep our stuff wet, and then the moment we get done packing, everything goes beautiful.
And then, my worst that I can think of just right quick off the bat is me and a buddy went elk hunting 2 seasons ago, and just it turned into hell, both weather and physically. We were just gassed because we spent the whole day hunting, hiking, calling, and trying to find critters that weren't there, and mentally we were done, physically we were done, and by the time we got back to the truck, we were like, we had a whole nother day, and both of us were like, nope, we're done, we're getting out of here. Didn't discourage, but yeah, it was tough to deal with.
Yeah, I think we've all been there. Just hit that proverbial wall. I think we're coming up on 30 minutes, which in the world of YouTube videos is an eternity. So I think we're going to go ahead and end it. I hope you enjoyed this. If you're interested in me continuing to do these Boots and Brews sessions, let me know below. If you have other questions you have, again, let me know below. And thanks for joining us in the lounge of my humble abode, which is exactly 3 feet away from where I normally film. It's a small apartment. So, thanks for joining me.
Cheers.
And as always, keep hiking on.